A Tudor king could command armies, imprison nobles, and sign decrees that changed the fate of a kingdom. Yet sometimes the direction of his decisions began in a quiet conversation, no council ever recorded. Inside the glittering halls of the Tudor court, power did not always move through crowns, titles, or loud debates. It often travelled through softer things, a careful question, a passionate silence, a presence that seemed gentle but slowly shaped how a powerful man saw the world around him. These women held no official authority, yet their influence could drift into the thoughts behind royal decisions. Tonight, we step quietly into that hidden world to explore how Tudor mistresses used softness, silence, and understanding to guide the minds of kings. So, before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Adjust the pillow to fit your head. Maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere. And let's begin this journey together tonight. If a traveller had entered a Tudor palace on an ordinary morning, the arrangement of power would have been visible without anyone needing to explain it. The king stood at the centre of every decision, and around him gathered layers of noblemen, advisors, and officials who managed the kingdom in his name. Their clothing alone revealed their importance. Heavy velvet coats, wide sleeves, rings set with dark stones, and chains of gold rested on their shoulders like visible signs of authority. When these men moved through the halls, others stepped aside. Servants lowered their eyes. Conversations paused. The public world of Tudor England belonged almost entirely to men. Political power flowed through male hands in ways that appeared unquestionable. The king ruled the kingdom. Noblemen administered land and armies, and male clergy interpreted religious law. Even local communities followed the same pattern. Village leaders, magistratus, and landowners were nearly always male. Their decisions determined taxes, dispute, punishments, and alliances. Women were present in every part of society, yet their presence rarely translated into official authority. The law described them primarily through relationships. A woman was defined as a daughter under her father's household, or a wife under her husband's authority. Property, inheritance, and public office passed almost exclusively through male lines. Even wealthy noblewomen often required male guardians to manage their estates or represent them in legal matters. Religion reinforced these expectations with quiet certainty. Sermons repeated familiar lessons about obedience and order. Clergymen described the household as a reflection of divine hierarchy, where the husband guided the family just as the king guided the kingdom. Within this framework, female modesty and silence were praised as virtues. A woman who spoke too boldly risked suspicion or criticism. For many people living in Tudor England, this structure did not appear harsh or unusual. It was simply the way the world worked. Order depended on hierarchy, and hierarchy depended on clearly defined roles. Stability, people believed, required each person to accept the position they had been given. Marriage stood at the center of this system. Among noble families, marriage rarely emerged from affection alone. It was an agreement that connected two houses, secured property, and strengthened political alliances. Contracts were negotiated carefully, sometimes years before the couple even met. Land, titles, and influence moved through these unions like pieces on a chessboard. A noble wife, therefore, represented more than a companion. She embodied the alliance itself. Her behavior carried symbolic importance. She was expected to maintain dignity, protect the reputation of her husband's household, and produce heirs who would continue the family line. Public ceremonies emphasized these responsibilities. At feasts, weddings, and religious events. Noble couples appeared together as visible proof of unity and stability. Yet beneath the formality of these arrangements, emotional distance was common. Daily life inside great houses revolved around obligation. Nobles attended councils, reviewed estates, negotiated marriages, and managed conflicts with rival families. Formal dinners and religious observances filled much of the remaining time. Privacy rarely existed in the way modern people might imagine it. Even in personal chambers, servants waited quietly nearby to deliver food, maintain fires, or carry messages. Conversations were rarely truly private. In such an environment, relationships were often shaped by duty rather than personal comfort. A marriage could last decades without creating deep companionship. Affection might grow gradually, but it was not the primary purpose of the union. For men who held political authority, emotional expression also carried risks. Words spoken carelessly could spread through court gossip. Complaints about advisors might reach rivals. Even casual remarks about alliances could create misunderstandings that traveled quickly through noble networks. This atmosphere encouraged caution. Public speech became controlled and deliberate. Private feelings remained hidden behind careful language. The court itself functioned like a stage, where everyone understood that appearances mattered. Women within these households learned to navigate this system quietly. They observed conversations, memorized alliances, and paid attention to the shifting moods of powerful men. While the law granted them little direct authority, daily proximity allowed them to witness the mechanisms of influence more closely than outsiders might expect. Yet their official roles remained narrow. A wife protected reputation. A daughter secured alliances through marriage. A lady-in-waiting assisted queens and noblewomen while maintaining strict decorum. None of these positions granted the freedom to speak openly about politics or challenge the authority of men who governed the realm. Within this carefully ordered society, affection and companionship sometimes found unexpected paths. Men who lived under constant scrutiny often searched for spaces where the weight of ceremony briefly disappeared. A conversation free from formal expectations could feel rare and valuable. In quiet rooms away from council chambers and banquet halls, different kinds of relationships sometimes developed. These relationships existed outside the legal structures that defined marriage. They carried no official recognition, no written contracts, and no ceremonial approval from the church. Yet they appeared regularly enough that few people considered them surprising. Royal courts across Europe quietly acknowledged their existence, even while pretending otherwise. Such connections revealed something important about Tudor society. While public authority rested firmly in male hands, emotional influence did not always obey the same boundaries. The official structure of power remained visible and stable. Yet beneath that surface lay a network of personal conversations, confidences, and quiet exchanges that rarely appeared in formal records. Many observers at the time paid little attention to these subtle occurrences. The king ruled, the nobles advised him, and the church maintained moral order. From a distance, the system looked solid and predictable. But anyone who spent enough time inside those palaces would eventually notice that decisions were not always shaped only by councils or proclamations. Sometimes they began in far quieter places. In Tudor England, authority stood openly in the hands of kings and noblemen, supported by law, art, religion, and tradition. Yet behind the ceremonies and political alliances existed a world of private conversations that rarely appeared in official records. And within those quiet spaces, influence could grow in ways that the formal structure of power never fully controlled. A Tudor mistress existed in a position that the law did not fully acknowledge. She held no title that granted her rank in the court hierarchy, and her name rarely appeared in the official structures that defined noble life. When royal records listed positions within the palace, they described queens, ladies-in-waiting, servants, advisors, and guards The mistress did not belong to any of these categories. Her presence remained unofficial, even when everyone around her clearly understood the nature of her relationship. This lack of recognition created a strange contradiction. A mistress could spend large amounts of time close to powerful men, sometimes even living within palace grounds. Yet her place in society remained uncertain. She did not stand beside the king during ceremonies. She did not appear in public processions that displayed royal authority. In formal gatherings, her position could be ambiguous, sometimes treated with politeness, sometimes with quiet distance. Despite this uncertainty, her influence was rarely ignored. Courtiers were careful observers. Life at court depended on noticing small details that revealed changing alliances and personal favor. If a woman appeared frequently near the private chambers of a powerful man, people noticed. If gifts began to appear, fine fabrics, jewelry, or a house provided for her comfort, people noticed that as well. None of these signs required official confirmation. Everyone understood that a mistress lived close to power, even if that closeness carried no formal recognition. Yet the advantages of such proximity were balanced by constant instability. Unlike a noble wife, whose marriage contract secured property and social protection, a mistress possessed no legal guarantee of security. Her position could disappear as quickly as it appeared. A noble marriage involved written agreements, family witnesses, and church approval. Land and wealth were often negotiated in advance, ensuring that the wife retained certain protections even if her husband's affection changed. A mistress received none of these assurances. Her future depended entirely on the continuing attention of the man who favored her. If that attention faded, the life she had grown accustomed to could vanish without warning. Some mistresses were granted gifts or estates that offered temporary stability, but these gestures were never guaranteed. A new political crisis, a change in personal preference, or the arrival of another woman could alter everything. Without legal recognition, she possessed little ability to defend her position. This fragile foundation shaped the behavior of many women who entered such relationships. They learned quickly that survival required careful awareness of the moods surrounding them. Unlike noble wives, who occupied a defined place in the social order, a mistress existed in a shifting space that depended on emotional favor rather than law. That favor could be generous, but unpredictable. A powerful man might offer attention, comfort, and material support during one period of his life, only to withdraw it later when political priorities changed. The woman who relied on that attention, therefore, had to navigate the relationship with unusual sensitivity. Many understood that open demands could be dangerous. Asking directly for recognition or privilege might remind others of her unofficial status. Drawing too much public attention could provoke resentment among courtiers or hostility from the family of the man she accompanied. Remaining discreet often proved safer than seeking visibility. For this reason, the behavior of many Tudor mistresses appeared calm and restrained to those watching from a distance. They spoke carefully. They avoided confrontations that could expose their vulnerability. They cultivated the image of a companion who did not threaten the public structure of marriage or authority. Yet this restraint was rarely a simple submission. Living in a position dependent on personal favor required constant observation and adjustment. A mistress who survived for years near powerful men usually possessed a deep understanding of the environment surrounding her. She noticed tensions between advisors, changes in political alliances, and shifts in mood that others might overlook. Access to private conversations gave her insights that even respected courtiers sometimes lacked. While noblemen debated policies in council chambers, the private thoughts behind those debates often appeared elsewhere. In quieter spaces, where powerful men spoke more freely, listening during these moments could reveal doubts, ambition, and frustrations that never appeared in official discussions. A woman who heard such thoughts occupied a delicate but significant position. She remained outside the legal structure of power, yet she stood close enough to witness how that power actually moved. The distance between those two realities defined the unusual role of the Tudor mistress. She possessed no formal authority, no guaranteed property, and no protection from sudden change. Yet her closeness to powerful men allowed her to exist near the quiet centre of influence that shaped many decisions. A Tudor mistress lived without legal status, without secure wealth, and without protection from changing favour. Her life depended entirely on the attention of the man who kept her near the court. And when survival depended so completely on personal favour, understanding how to manage that favour became the most important skill she could possess. Life inside the Tudor court required careful behaviour from anyone who wished to remain close to power. The palace was not only a residence for the king, but also a crowded environment where hundreds of people watched one another constantly. Courtiers measured their words. Servants carried quiet observations through corridors. And noble families paid close attention to anything that might affect their position. Within such a setting, open confrontation rarely ended well. A woman who raised her voice against powerful men, or even against other members of the court, risked attracting attention that could quickly become dangerous. Reputation mattered greatly in Tudor society. A single rumour about arrogance, manipulation, or disobedience could spread through the palace in a matter of days. For a mistress whose position already lacked legal protection, attracting negative attention could end everything. Many women, therefore, learned that survival depended on avoiding direct conflict. Disagreements that might be spoken openly in private households could not be expressed the same way inside royal courts. A mistress could not challenge advisors, criticize noble families, or question the authority of the man whose favour protected her. Silence often proved safer than argument. From the outside, this behaviour appeared as obedience. Observers saw a woman who rarely contradicted powerful men, who spoke softly during conversations, and who responded with calm agreement rather than resistance. Her manner seemed modest and restrained, fitting neatly into the expectations Tudor society placed upon women. Yet beneath that quiet surface existed a more deliberate strategy. Maintaining a gentle image created a sense of comfort for the men around her. Powerful figures in Tudor England lived under constant pressure. Their decisions affected armies, estates, and political alliances. Advisors often argued with them. Rivals challenged their authority, and courtiers competed for their attention. Within this atmosphere of tension, a calm presence could feel unexpectedly valuable. A mistress who listened patiently and avoided confrontation offered something that political advisors rarely provided. She allowed powerful men to speak without the pressure of debate. Complaints could be voiced without fear of public embarrassment. Doubts could be expressed without appearing weak before rivals. This atmosphere of safety did not happen by accident. It developed through consistent behaviour. A mistress who wished to remain close to power had to demonstrate that she did not threaten the authority of the man she accompanied. She avoided appearing demanding or competitive. Instead, she cultivated the image of someone who understood his burdens and accepted his position without challenge. Such behaviour made conversations easier. When a powerful man believed he was not being judged or resisted, he often spoke more freely. Personal frustrations, suspicions about advisors, or concerns about political alliances could emerge in these quieter discussions. The woman listening during those moments gained access to thoughts rarely expressed in public settings. Listening carefully became an important skill. A mistress who remembered details from previous conversations could respond in ways that reinforced trust. Small acknowledgements of a man's concerns might encourage him to speak again later. Gradually, this pattern of calm listening created the impression that she understood him better than others did. Understanding, even when quiet, could become influential. It allowed suggestions to appear without sounding like demands. A simple remark offered gently might remain in a man's thoughts long after the conversation ended, because it arrived within a moment of comfort rather than argument. The idea could feel natural rather than forced. The key to this influence rested in its subtlety. If a mistress appeared openly ambitious or controlling, suspicion would quickly surround her. Courtiers might accuse her of manipulating the king. Noble families might treat her as a threat. Such attention could destroy the fragile position she depended upon. Remaining gentle and agreeable prevented this reaction. The image of obedience protected her from scrutiny, while allowing private influence to grow quietly. Observers saw only patience and modesty. They rarely considered that these qualities might also function as deliberate tools. Inside the palace, many people understood the value of appearances. A nobleman displayed loyalty, even when competing for influence. A servant bowed respectfully, even when listening carefully for useful information. In the same way, a mistress might appear obedient while navigating a far more complicated reality. Her survival depended on balance. Too much silence could make her seem unimportant. Too much confidence could make her appear dangerous. Remaining close to power required understanding when to speak and when to remain quiet. Those who mastered this balance often remained near the center of court life far longer than others expected. The quiet image of obedience, therefore, served a purpose beyond simple politeness. It allowed a woman without legal authority to exist comfortably within a system designed to exclude her from power. And within that system, patience could sometimes accomplish more than confrontation. At the Tudor court, obedience often appeared to be a sign of weakness, especially when displayed by women who held no official authority. Yet this quiet behavior created a sense of safety that allowed powerful men to lower their guard. In those moments of comfort, a man sometimes revealed far more about his fears, doubts, and desires than he ever intended. Inside the Tudor court, authority usually appeared in clear and visible forms. Kings issued commands, noblemen carried seals of office, and councils debated decisions that affected entire regions. Power looked loud and deliberate. It announced itself through decrees, ceremonies, and displays of rank that left little doubt about who stood above whom. Yet the daily life of the palace contained another layer that rarely appeared in official records. Much of court life unfolded in smaller spaces where voices were quieter and conversations were less formal. Private chambers, garden walks, and late evenings beside fireplaces created moments where powerful men set aside the rigid language required in council rooms. In these moments, authority did not disappear, but it softened. A mistress who occupied this quieter space rarely needed to compete with the public displays of power surrounding her. Her presence carried a different tone. She did not arrive with documents to sign or advisors to argue with. She did not represent a political alliance negotiated between noble families. Instead, she appeared as a companion who seemed distant from the tensions of the court. This difference changed the nature of the conversation. A man who spent his day defending decisions before rivals often felt relief in a place where no debate was expected. The absence of confrontation allowed his guard to lower. Complaints about advisors might emerge. Doubts about political strategies might appear. Thoughts that would never be spoken in council could surface quietly during these private exchanges. The woman listening in such moments rarely needed to raise her voice to influence the conversation. Soft responses carried surprising weight. A gentle question could redirect attention. A sympathetic remark could encourage a man to speak further about a problem that troubled him. The interaction did not resemble persuasion in the obvious sense. It looked more like understanding. This subtlety often made the influence difficult to recognize. A mistress did not command armies or issue royal proclamations. She did not appear in documents that described the machinery of government. From the outside, her role seemed limited to companionship. Observers might assume that her presence held little importance beyond personal comfort. Yet repeated conversations gradually created familiarity. A man who found comfort in a particular companion often returned to her during moments of uncertainty. He might seek reassurance before making difficult choices or express frustrations that had grown during the day. Each conversation strengthened a pattern in which emotional ease replaced formal distance. Within that pattern, even small remarks could matter. A suggestion offered quietly might remain in his thoughts long after the conversation ended, because it appeared within a moment of calm rather than confrontation. The idea felt less like advice and more like a natural conclusion. The effectiveness of this influence depended largely on timing. Moments of weakness often appeared after long debates, political conflicts, or personal disappointments. A man who felt misunderstood by advisors or pressured by obligations might become unusually receptive to the calm voice of someone who seemed free from those struggles. Recognizing such moments required careful attention. A mistress who survived for long periods near powerful men usually possessed a sharp awareness of mood and atmosphere. She noticed the tension in a voice, the fatigue after a council meeting, or the frustration lingering after a disagreement with advisors. Responding gently at the right moment could shift the direction of a conversation without ever appearing forceful. This approach allowed influence to remain invisible. Open ambition might have attracted suspicion. Courtiers who believed a mistress sought political control could easily turn against her. Accusations of manipulation spread quickly in royal courts, and the consequences could be severe. Quiet restraint protected her from these dangers. By maintaining the appearance of obedience and emotional support, she avoided the hostility that open authority might provoke. Her influence remained hidden behind gestures that appeared harmless to those observing from a distance. Inside the palace, many people understood that appearances did not always reveal the full truth. Public authority belonged to kings and noblemen. Their voices filled the halls of government, and their decisions shaped the kingdom. Yet behind those visible structures existed private moments where thoughts moved more freely. Within those moments, control sometimes appeared in unexpected forms. A woman who seemed gentle and obedient could guide a conversation simply by understanding the emotional needs of the person speaking beside her. She did not need commands, arguments, or displays of dominance. She only needed patience, careful listening, and the ability to recognize when a quiet word could reach a vulnerable place in the mind of a powerful man. Obedience at the Tudor court often appeared small and unimportant beside the loud authority of kings and councils. Yet quiet companionship created moments where powerful men revealed their doubts and frustrations without restraint. During those calm exchanges, influence could emerge not through commands, but through a careful understanding of where a single, gentle remark might quietly settle in the mind. Life for powerful men in Tudor England involved constant performance. Authority did not rest only in laws or titles. It also depended on reputation. A king or nobleman was expected to appear confident, decisive, and worthy of obedience at all times. The court surrounding him watched closely for any sign of weakness, uncertainty, or hesitation. Within this environment, respect became one of the most valuable forms of currency. A nobleman expected admiration from those beneath him and loyalty from those who served him. Courtiers bowed when he entered a room. Servants lowered their voices in his presence. Even conversations were shaped carefully so that his authority remained visible. These gestures reinforced the image that Tudor society required powerful men to maintain. Yet beneath this constant display of confidence, the emotional reality could be more complicated. Powerful men faced pressure from many directions at once. Rival nobles competed for influence. Advisors debated strategies, and political alliances shifted unexpectedly. A king in particular carried the burden of decisions that affected thousands of people across the kingdom. In such circumstances, the expectation of constant authority could feel exhausting. Admitting uncertainty in public risked damaging one's reputation. A nobleman who appeared unsure might encourage rivals to challenge him. A king who openly questioned his own decisions might weaken the loyalty of those who depended on him for leadership. For this reason, doubts were often hidden behind confident language. Council meetings rarely allowed space for hesitation. Advisors argued passionately for their own proposals, each attempting to convince the ruler that their strategy served the kingdom best. these debates could grow tense, especially when political futures or military plans were involved. Within those moments, a ruler was expected to remain firm. Disagreements might be tolerated among advisors, but open challenges directed toward the king himself carried risks. Respect the required distance. Even when courtiers disagreed privately with a decision, they often expressed their concerns carefully to avoid appearing disloyal. This delicate balance between authority and insecurity shaped many interactions within the Tudor court. Powerful men desired control over the world around them. They expected their commands to be carried out and their judgments to be respected. Maintaining such control reinforced their status and protected their position within the complex network of noble alliances. At the same time, they also desired affirmation. Admiration from others helped confirm that their authority remained secure. Compliments, expressions of loyalty, and visible respect reassured them that their decisions were accepted by those around them. Without such affirmation, even powerful figures could begin to question the stability of their position. This emotional need rarely appeared openly in political discussions. Instead, it emerged quietly through personal interactions. A man who spent his day surrounded by advisors and rivals might value the company of someone who expressed genuine admiration rather than strategic agreement. Listening to praise could feel very different from hearing political arguments. The difference mattered. Advisors often supported a ruler because their own careers depended on his favor. Their loyalty could appear practical rather than sincere. In contrast, a companion who seemed emotionally supportive created a sense of personal validation that political allies could not easily provide. A mistress who understood this dynamic gained an unusual advantage. By offering admiration rather than challenge, she allowed powerful men to experience their authority in a more comfortable way. Her responses reinforced the image they wished to see in themselves. Instead of questioning their decisions, she might acknowledge the difficulty of ruling or express appreciation for their strength. These small gestures often carried more emotional weight than formal declarations of loyalty. When a man felt respected and understood, he became more relaxed in conversation. His thoughts flowed more freely, and the guarded tone required in council discussions softened. The environment shifted from competition to reassurance. Within this atmosphere, influence could grow quietly. A suggestion offered by someone who appeared admiring did not sound like criticism. It felt like support. A gentle remark about a rival or advisor might be received more openly because it arrived within a context of trust rather than opposition. The power of such influence depended on understanding the emotional landscape surrounding powerful men. They wished to maintain control, yet they also desired recognition for that control. They expected obedience, yet they appreciated affirmation that their authority inspired admiration. Balancing these two needs created opportunities for those who understood them. A mistress who avoided confrontation while offering admiration could become a figure who satisfied both desires at once. She did not threaten the authority of the man she accompanied, yet she provided the reassurance that his authority remained worthy of respect. The court might see only a quiet companion standing beside a powerful figure, but within private conversations, the emotional reassurance she provided could shape how that figure viewed the people and decisions surrounding him. Powerful men in Tudor England expected obedience from those around them and rarely tolerated public challenges to their authority. At the same time, admiration and reassurance helped confirm the image of strength they worked constantly to maintain. Within private moments of affirmation, the quiet voice of someone who seemed supportive could carry a surprising amount of influence. Conversation inside the Tudor court rarely moved in simple directions. Words carried weight, and people spoke carefully because every statement could travel far beyond the room in which it was spoken. Advisors chose their arguments with caution. Courtiers measured their loyalty through polite language. Even casual remarks might later appear in reports or gossip that reached powerful ears. In such an atmosphere, listening quietly could become more valuable than speaking. Many powerful men spent their days surrounded by voices competing for attention. Advisors presented plans for alliances, military campaigns, or financial policies. Noble families requested favours that would strengthen their position within the court. Clergymen spoke about moral duties and religious responsibilities that shaped the kingdom's direction. Each voice carried its own intention. Some hoped to influence decisions. Others hoped to secure protection or advancement. Even sincere advice could appear complicated when several competing interests surrounded the ruler who had to make the final judgment. Within this constant noise, a listener who seemed patient and attentive could stand apart. A mistress who listened without interruption created a rare experience for the man speaking to her. Instead of defending his authority or arguing his position, he could describe events in his own way. Frustrations that remained hidden during council debates might emerge during these quieter moments. The simple act of listening carefully could therefore become powerful. Listening in this context did not mean silence alone. It involved attention to tone, memory of earlier conversations, and an awareness of the emotional state of the person speaking. When a man described a conflict with advisors or expressed doubt about a decision, a thoughtful listener could respond in ways that acknowledged his concerns. Such responses created a sense of understanding. A mistress who reflected a man's thoughts to him often appeared sympathetic rather than argumentative. If he described feeling betrayed by a rival, she might acknowledge how difficult such betrayal must feel. If he worried about a political choice, she might recognize the pressure that came with responsibility. These reflections did not challenge his conclusions. Instead, they allowed him to hear his own thoughts, echoed with quiet agreement. This pattern created the impression that the listener understood his perspective more deeply than others did. Understanding, or the appearance of understanding, carried emotional importance. A man who believed that someone truly understood him often returned to that person when new difficulties appeared. The comfort of familiar sympathy encouraged further conversations. Over time, these repeated exchanges created a relationship built not only on attraction, but also on emotional reliance. Reliance developed slowly but steadily. Each conversation reinforced the sense that one person offered a calm place where thoughts could be expressed without criticism. This contrast mattered in a court environment where political discussions often turned confrontational. Advisors questioned decisions. Rival nobles criticized strategies. And ambassadors negotiated firmly for their own kingdoms. In those settings, every conversation felt like a contest of influence. Private companionship offered a different experience. A mistress who responded with quiet agreement and patient listening created a space that felt removed from those conflicts. The man speaking to her could organize his thoughts more freely, exploring doubts that might appear dangerous in formal discussions. Over time, this process sometimes strengthened emotional dependence. A powerful figure who repeatedly turned to the same companion for reassurance might begin to associate her presence with clarity and calm. Decisions discussed in those moments of comfort could take on greater significance simply because they were spoken in a place where he felt understood. Influence entered quietly through this pattern. The listener did not need to demand attention or assert authority. Her role as someone who seemed uniquely understanding allowed her words to carry weight without appearing forceful. Even small remarks could affect the direction of a conversation. A gentle agreement might encourage one line of thinking. A thoughtful question might cause the speaker to reconsider a rival's intentions. Because these comments appeared within a context of sympathy, they felt supportive rather than strategic. Observers rarely noticed how much influence could grow through listening. From the outside, a mistress seemed to offer companionship rather than guidance. Courtiers might assume that political discussions remained confined to council chambers where official advisors debated policy. Yet the quiet repetition of private conversations could gradually shift the emotional landscape surrounding important decisions. The man speaking believed he had found someone who understood him better than others did. That belief alone could make her presence increasingly significant. Careful listening inside the Tudor court often appeared simple and harmless beside the louder voices of advisors and rivals. Yet, understanding a powerful man's thoughts and reflecting them gently back to him created a sense of trust that few others could offer. Over time, That quiet trust could deepen into a dependence that even the most powerful men did not always recognize. Marriage in Tudor society carried expectations that reached far beyond the relationship between two individuals. A noble marriage represented alliances between families, agreements about property, and the continuation of bloodlines that shaped the political landscape of the kingdom. Every aspect of the union carried responsibility. The wife symbolized stability, legitimacy, and the order of the household that reflected the wider order of society. Because of this, the relationship between husband and wife rarely belonged entirely to them alone. Families watched carefully for signs of harmony or tension. Servants moved constantly through shared spaces, maintaining fires, delivering messages, and observing the quiet rhythms of daily life. Even the arrangement of meals or seating during gatherings reflected the expectations surrounding noble marriage. Privacy existed only in limited moments, often interrupted by the practical needs of running a large household. The responsibilities placed upon a noble wife reinforced this structure. She managed servants, supervised the domestic economy of the household, and represented the dignity of her family during public events. Her behavior carried symbolic meaning, reminding everyone present that the marriage itself served a political and social purpose. Personal feelings rarely occupied the center of this arrangement. Affection might develop over time, yet it existed alongside duty rather than replacing it. For men who held political authority, this structure created a particular kind of distance. Their marriages were part of the machinery that maintained alliances and property. Conversations between husband and wife often revolved around practical concerns, management of estates, family matters, or obligations toward visiting nobles. These discussions reflected the responsibilities expected of their positions. Emotional relief rarely appeared easily in such circumstances. A ruler or nobleman who spent the day negotiating political disputes or hearing petitions from advisors often carried that tension back into his household. Yet the structure of marriage, shaped by duty and observation, sometimes limited the kind of conversation that might ease those burdens. Another kind of companionship, therefore, developed quietly alongside these official relationships. A mistress existed outside the obligations that defined marriage. She did not represent a political alliance between families. She did not manage estates or organize household responsibilities. Her presence carried none of the formal duties associated with noble wives. This difference created a space that felt separate from the expectations surrounding marriage. When a powerful man visited such a companion, the atmosphere often changed. The conversation no longer needed to revolve around alliances, property, or obligations to family members. Instead, the interaction could move toward personal reflections that rarely appeared in more formal settings. This separation created the impression of a private world. A walk through palace gardens, a quiet chamber away from crowded halls, or an evening spent beside a small fire allowed the rhythms of court life to slow, without the presence of advisors or servants observing every exchange. A powerful man could speak more freely about the frustrations that accompanied his responsibilities. For a moment, the weight of authority felt lighter. The woman accompanying him during these moments often appeared to embody that sense of relief. Her role did not involve managing political alliances or maintaining the public dignity of a noble household. She existed in a space that felt detached from the pressures of formal duty. Because of this, her presence could resemble a kind of emotional refuge. A ruler who spent his days defending decisions before rival factions might value the calm atmosphere created in such private encounters, speaking openly about frustrations, disappointments, or ambitions became easier when those words did not threaten political reputation. This dynamic gradually strengthened the emotional importance of those meetings. The mistress did not replace the wife within the structure of society. The legal and ceremonial role of marriage remained intact, supported by the church and reinforced by family alliances. Yet the emotional experience of companionship could shift toward the quieter space where personal burdens were easier to express. Over time, this separation between duty and relief became significant. Marriage continued to represent order, stability, and the continuation of noble lineage, private companionship. However, sometimes offered something differenter, temporary escape from the expectations that defined public life. In the complex environment of the Tudor court, such moments carried unexpected influence. A place that allowed powerful men to rest their thoughts often became a place where those thoughts moved in new directions. Quiet conversations held in comfort could linger in memory long after the official debates of the day had ended. Marriage in Tudor society remained a formal institution built on duty, alliance, and the expectations of noble families. Private companionship existed outside those obligations, creating a space where powerful men could speak without the weight of ceremony. In that calmer atmosphere, the quiet voice of someone offering relief could begin to matter more than anyone watching from the crowded halls of the court. The structure of Tudor society placed marriage at the center of legitimacy and authority. A noble wife stood beside her husband, not only as a companion, but as a symbol of stability recognized by law, church, and tradition. Her presence confirmed alliances between families and reinforced the continuity of noble lineage. When she appeared beside her husband during ceremonies or public gatherings, the meaning of that image was clear to everyone watching. Marriage represented order. Legal authority followed that order carefully. Property moved through recognized unions. Inheritance depended on legitimate heirs. And the church confirmed the sanctity of marital bonds through rituals that reinforced social hierarchy. Within this system, the wife occupied a visible and respected position. She held responsibilities that extended beyond personal life into the wider reputation of her family and household. The court acknowledged this authority openly. During public occasions, the wife stood in places that reflected her status. Servants attended to her needs. Courtiers greeted her with appropriate respect, and noblewomen recognized her position within the social order of the palace. Everything about her role emphasized legitimacy and structure. Yet daily life inside the court contained layers that official ceremony could not fully control. Political decisions did not emerge only from public discussions or written decrees. They also developed through conversations held in smaller rooms, late in the evening, or during moments when formal duties had temporarily ended. These conversations rarely appeared in documents that described how authority functioned. They existed in spaces that observers rarely recorded. A ruler might spend hours debating policy in council chambers, surrounded by advisors who argued their own perspectives. These meetings often involved strategy, negotiation, and disagreements shaped by political interests. Every participant spoke with the awareness that others were listening carefully. Once those meetings ended, the atmosphere changed. Away from the crowded rooms of official debate, the ruler could reflect on what had been said. Doubts about advisors, frustrations with rival factions, or uncertainties about difficult decisions sometimes surfaced only after the formal discussion had finished. These reflections required an audience that did not immediately challenge or debate them. Such an audience sometimes appeared in unexpected places. A mistress, existing outside the legal structure of marriage, often occupied a quieter position within the palace. She did not participate in ceremonies that displayed royal authority. She did not speak in council meetings where political strategies were negotiated. Her presence carried none of the formal weight associated with the wife. Yet her proximity to private conversation created a different kind of significance. While the wife represented the visible strength of lawful union, the mistress often stood near moments when personal thoughts emerged without restraint. The difference between these two roles shaped the subtle contrast between authority and influence inside the Tudor court. Authority remained public and structured. Influence often remained quiet and personal. A wife could reinforce alliances and protect the dignity of noble households through her position. Her presence represented continuity and legitimacy. The court recognized this role as part of the established order that supported the kingdom's stability. A mistress operated in a different sphere. She existed in the informal spaces where powerful men sometimes relaxed the careful discipline required in public life. Conversations held in those spaces could move freely across personal concerns, political doubts, and reflections about the people surrounding the throne. These exchanges rarely looked significant at the moment they occurred. A remark spoken gently during a quiet evening might seem no more than casual conversation. A question asked during a walk through palace gardens might appear ordinary. Yet such moments allowed ideas to form without the pressure of public debate. Over time, those ideas could carry unexpected weight. When decisions eventually returned to council chambers, they sometimes carried traces of earlier reflections that had begun elsewhere. The advisors surrounding the throne might debate the outcome vigorously, unaware that the direction of thought had shifted long before the discussion began. Observers inside the court occasionally sensed this quiet influence. They noticed when a ruler repeated certain concerns that had previously been spoken in private. They watched for subtle changes in attitude toward advisors or rivals. These observations rarely appeared in written records, but they circulated quietly through conversation. The distinction between authority and influence, therefore, became an unspoken reality of court life. Marriage preserved the visible structure of power. Private companionship sometimes shaped the emotional currents that moved beneath that structure. Both existed simultaneously within the palace. Marriage in Tudor society carried the legal authority that upheld order, alliance, and legitimacy before the eyes of the court. Private companionship often occupied the quieter spaces where personal thoughts were spoken without restraint. Important decisions sometimes began not in crowded council chambers, but in the calm privacy where influence moved more freely than authority. Life inside the Tudor court moved according to a strict rhythm that few people could escape. From the moment the day began, every action followed expectations shaped by rank, ceremony, and long-standing tradition. The arrival of the king required bows and formal greetings. Meals unfolded according to carefully arranged seating that reflected status and hierarchy. Even the language used in conversation followed patterns that had been practiced for generations. The court functioned as a carefully managed stage. Every movement communicated something about authority and loyalty. Courtiers stood at precise distances from the throne. Servants entered rooms quietly and withdrew without drawing attention. Clothing itself became part of the structure, with layers of velvet, silk, and embroidery indicating exactly where a person stood within the social order. Within this environment, spontaneity rarely appeared. People watched their words carefully, aware that every gesture might be interpreted by others who shared the same rooms. A careless remark could travel quickly through corridors filled with listeners. A display of impatience might be remembered by rivals searching for weakness. Power demanded constant discipline. For rulers and noblemen, maintaining this discipline required attention throughout the day. Council meetings involved complex debates about alliances, taxation, and military matters. Visitors from foreign courts arrived with requests or demands that required careful negotiation. Even moments of leisure, such as hunting or banquets, carried political meaning that could not be ignored. The weight of ceremony, therefore, surrounded nearly every aspect of court life. Within such a structured world, encounters that felt less rigid could stand out immediately. A conversation, free from formal language, might feel unusual. A moment when someone listened without calculation or expectation might feel surprisingly rare. This difference often defined the presence of a mistress. Unlike noble wives who appeared beside their husbands during public ceremonies, a mistress usually occupied spaces removed from official events. She did not represent family alliances or the responsibilities of noble households. Her presence did not require the same strict adherence to ritual. Because of this, the atmosphere around her could feel noticeably different. A conversation held with a mistress often lacked the formal tone required during political discussions. The words spoken in those moments did not need to impress advisors or satisfy court protocol. They could move more freely. reflecting personal thoughts rather than public statements. Such freedom created contrast. A powerful man who spent most of his day surrounded by rigid expectations might experience these quieter interactions as a kind of relief. Instead of defending his authority, he could speak without preparing each sentence carefully. The absence of ceremony allowed the conversation to move in ways that felt less controlled. This difference in tone shaped how people experienced those encounters. The mistress did not appear bound by the same responsibilities that governed noble wives. She did not organize household affairs, represent alliances between families, or maintain the formal dignity required of public figures. Her role remained separate from the machinery of court life. That separation created a particular kind of attraction. In a palace filled with rules, gestures that felt natural could seem refreshing. A calm voice, a relaxed conversation, or even simple laughter carried a quality rarely found in official gatherings. The absence of rigid expectation made these moments feel personal rather than political. Observers within the court sometimes recognized this contrast. They understood that powerful men rarely escaped the pressures of authority. Every decision they made attracted scrutiny from advisors, rivals, and foreign ambassadors. Living under constant observation encouraged caution in nearly every interaction. A companion who seemed removed from those pressures, therefore, offered something different. Her presence suggested a space where authority did not need to be displayed constantly. Within that atmosphere, the rigid language of court life softened. Words became less formal, and thoughts moved more freely. This change in tone carried emotional significance. For someone accustomed to the demands of ceremony, the experience of relaxed conversation could create a sense of comfort that remained difficult to find elsewhere in the palace. Over time, that comfort strengthened the value of those meetings. The contrast between rigid ceremony and quiet companionship became part of the relationship itself. While the court continued to function through strict protocol and visible hierarchy, these private moments revealed another dimension of life inside the palace. They showed how even the most disciplined environment contained spaces where formality loosened, and human conversation returned to a simpler rhythm. The Tudor court surrounded powerful men with ceremony, discipline, and constant observation that shaped every public interaction. Encounters free from these rigid expectations, therefore, carried a sense of ease that rarely appeared in official settings. That quiet contrast between formality and softness often made private companionship feel far more compelling than the carefully controlled world outside those rooms. Strength inside the Tudor court often appeared in visible forms. Noblemen demonstrated it through authority, military command, or political influence. Their decisions affected estates, alliances, and the balance of power that held the kingdom together. Confidence and control, therefore, became qualities that men were expected to display constantly in public life. Yet the experience of power also carried hidden burdens. A man who ruled land, commanded soldiers, or advised the crown rarely escaped the responsibility attached to those roles. Disputes between noble families required careful judgment. Rival factions within the court competed for influence and attention. Even moments that appeared peaceful on the surface could conceal tensions waiting to surface. In such an environment, the expectation of constant strength could become exhausting. Public life offered little room for vulnerability. A ruler who admitted weakness risked encouraging rivals. A nobleman who displayed uncertainty might weaken his reputation among peers who measured one another carefully. Because of this, many men learned to conceal their doubts behind confident expressions and controlled speech. The court rewarded certainty and authority. Within this atmosphere, encounters that presented a different emotional tone could stand out strongly. A companion who appeared calm and receptive created a space where powerful men did not need to prove themselves constantly. Conversations could move away from political debates and toward personal reflection. The presence of vulnerability in these moments often changed the direction of the interaction. A mistress who expressed small signs of weakness at the right time, could awaken a protective response in the man beside her. This vulnerability did not appear as helplessness. Instead, it appeared as a quiet trust placed in someone who seemed capable of offering reassurance. Such moments altered the emotional balance of the conversation. A man who felt responsible for protecting another person often experienced a renewed sense of purpose. Offering comfort reinforced the role he already played in public life as a figure of authority and strength. In private settings, this dynamic allowed him to see his power reflected in a more personal way. The woman who understood this reaction could guide the atmosphere of the interaction without appearing to control it. Displaying vulnerability carefully required awareness and restraint. If weakness appeared exaggerated or constant, it could provoke irritation rather than sympathy. But when expressed briefly and sincerely, it created a contrast with the rigid confidence expected in court life. That contrast carried emotional weight. A powerful man who believed someone relied upon his protection often felt a deeper attachment to that relationship. Providing reassurance confirmed his identity as a protector, a role celebrated by the values of Tudor society. The experience strengthened his connection to the person who seemed to trust him. This process rarely appeared dramatic. A quiet remark about uncertainty, a brief admission of worry, or a moment of visible emotion could create the opportunity for such reassurance to emerge. The response might come in the form of comforting words, gestures of kindness, or promises of support that reinforce the bond between them. Over time, these exchanges could create a subtle pattern. The mistress appeared vulnerable at moments when the man's protective instincts were strongest. He responded with reassurance that strengthened his attachment. Each repetition deepened the emotional connection, encouraging him to see her as someone who needed his presence. Within this pattern, influence developed gradually. The man believed he was offering support. Yet the relationship also strengthened his reliance on the companionship that allowed him to express that role. The person who awakened his protective instincts became increasingly important in maintaining his sense of purpose. Observers within the court might see only fragments of this interaction. They noticed gestures of generosity, gifts offered without clear explanation, or the unusual attention given to someone who held no official title. These signs appeared puzzling at times, yet they often reflected the quiet emotional dynamics unfolding behind closed doors. The woman involved rarely needed to issue commands or express demands. Her influence rested in the emotional environment she created, where vulnerability encouraged protection and protection encouraged attachment. Within that environment, her presence began to feel necessary rather than optional. Power, in such relationships, rarely resembled the authority exercised in council chambers. Instead, it appeared in the quiet exchange between reassurance and dependence that developed through repeated moments of trust. Carefully expressed vulnerability often appeared gentle and harmless within the structured world of the Tudor court. Yet, that softness could awaken powerful instincts of protection in the men who believed they were offering support. When reassurance became part of a repeated pattern, the person who inspired it could gradually become someone whose presence felt difficult to replace. Life inside the Tudor court depended heavily on reputation. A nobleman's standing did not rest only on land or titles, but also on the perception others held of him. Trust between advisors, loyalty among nobles, and confidence from the king all relied on the belief that a man acted with honor and reliability. Once doubt entered that belief, even quietly, its effects could travel through the court with surprising speed. For this reason, accusations carried serious consequences. Openly accusing a powerful figure of betrayal, incompetence, or disloyalty could easily provoke conflict. Such statements demanded proof and often forced the speaker to defend their claim before others who might already hold strong opinions. In the tense environment of court politics, direct accusations could create enemies just as quickly as they created allies. Because of this danger, people often communicated suspicion indirectly, Hints, question, and observations allowed doubt to appear without clear responsibility for introducing it. A person who merely asked whether something might be true could avoid appearing openly hostile. The suggestion remained present, yet it belonged to the listener as much as to the speaker. This subtle method of communication appeared frequently in the quiet conversations surrounding powerful men. A mistress who wished to influence the thinking of the man beside her rarely needed to accuse anyone directly. Doing so might appear manipulative or aggressive, drawing attention that could damage her fragile position. Instead, she could allow the idea of suspicion to emerge slowly through questions that sounded thoughtful rather than confrontational. A simple question could carry surprising weight. If a ruler mentioned an advisor during a conversation, she might respond by wondering gently whether that advisor truly supported his decisions. The tone would remain calm, almost curious. No accusation appeared within the words themselves. Yet the possibility of doubt had quietly entered the discussion. Once such a thought appeared, the mind often continued exploring it. Powerful men were accustomed to analyzing loyalty and intention among the people who surrounded them. Political survival required constant awareness of hidden motives and shifting alliances. A question suggesting uncertainty about someone's loyalty could therefore activate instincts already present. The ruler might begin reconsidering past interactions. He might remember moments when an advisor hesitated before offering support. He might recall conversations where certain words seemed carefully chosen. Events that previously appeared ordinary could suddenly seem suspicious when viewed through a new perspective. In this way, the suggestion of doubt did not require further explanation. The listener himself began constructing the narrative that supported the suspicion, because the idea seemed to emerge from his own reflection rather than from direct accusation. It felt more convincing. Occasionally, the introduction of doubt occurred through references to rumour. Rumours travelled easily through the Tudor court. Servants overheard fragments of conversations. Courtiers repeated stories with slight alterations. And noble families carried news from one estate to another. Not all rumours carried truth. Yet their presence alone could influence how people interpreted events. Mentioning such rumours carefully could introduce uncertainty without appearing responsible for spreading it. A mistress might remark that she had heard something unusual being discussed among the household servants. The comment might be offered with hesitation, even with a suggestion that the rumour was probably unimportant. Yet the mere existence of the story could encourage the man listening to consider whether there might be some hidden meaning behind it. The key to this approach rested in restraint. Repeating rumours too eagerly would attract suspicion. Expressing certainty about their truth would appear reckless. Instead, the remark remained gentle and uncertain, leaving space for the listener to decide how seriously the story should be taken. Once the thought entered his mind, the process often continued without further encouragement. Human imagination filled the gaps. Past disagreements, forgotten gestures, or ambiguous comments from rivals could suddenly acquire new meaning. A ruler who previously trusted an advisor completely might begin watching that advisor more carefully. These changes in perception rarely appeared dramatic. No public accusations occurred. No formal disputes erupted immediately. Instead, a quiet shift took place within the mind of the man who had begun reconsidering the intentions of those around him. That shift could alter future decisions in subtle ways. An advisor once trusted might receive fewer private discussions. A rival previously ignored might attract closer attention. Small adjustments in trust and caution gradually reshaped the relationships surrounding the throne. The woman who had introduced the original question rarely needed to repeat it. Her role had been limited to opening the door through which doubt could enter. Once that door stood open, the thoughts of the ruler moved forward on their own. From the outside, observers might notice only that attitudes had begun to change. Yet the origin of those changes often lay in quiet conversations, where a single, carefully placed question had encouraged a powerful man to reconsider what he believed about the people closest to him. Suspicion inside the Tudor court rarely began with loud accusations or open conflict. Instead, It often emerged from small questions that seemed harmless when first spoken. Once a powerful mind began exploring those questions, the quiet seed of doubt could grow in directions that even the person who planted it did not need to guide. Marriage in Tudor society stood as one of the most visible institutions supporting the social order of the kingdom. Noble unions represented alliances between powerful families, agreements that secured land, wealth, and influence across generations. When a husband and wife appeared together in public ceremonies, the image conveyed stability and legitimacy to everyone observing. This structure seemed strong and unbreakable. The Church reinforced the sanctity of marriage through religious teaching, while legal systems protected inheritance through legitimate unions. Families invested great care in arranging marriages that would preserve their status and strengthen their connections within the court. For those watching from the outside, the bond between husband and wife appeared firmly supported by both tradition and authority. Yet the emotional reality within these unions could be more fragile than the public image suggested. Many marriages among the nobility began not with affection but with negotiation. Families discussed property, political advantage, and lineage before the individuals involved even became acquainted with one another. The expectations surrounding these unions often emphasized duty over intimacy. Within such arrangements, distance could quietly develop. Husband and wife might share a household while leading largely separate lives shaped by their respective responsibilities. The man attended council meetings, negotiated alliances, and managed estates. The wife supervised servants, maintained the dignity of the household, and fulfilled the role expected of her within noble society. Their interactions often remained formal. Conversation frequently centered on matters related to family obligations or household management. Even within private spaces, the presence of attendants or the pressure of public reputation could prevent the expression of deeper personal thoughts. The marriage functioned efficiently as a social institution, yet it did not always provide emotional closeness. This quiet distance created an environment where small suggestions could carry unexpected weight. A mistress who occupied the informal space outside marriage often encountered the husband during moments when his thoughts moved more freely. The absence of ceremony and obligation allowed conversations to explore personal frustrations or uncertainties that rarely surfaced in the structured world of marital duty. Within these moments, a simple question could become powerful. The question did not need to accuse anyone or express hostility toward the wife. In fact, direct criticism might have appeared suspicious or disrespectful. Instead, the question often appeared gentle, almost hesitant, as if spoken out of curiosity rather than intention. A remark about whether the wife truly understood the pressures of ruling might begin such a conversation. The tone remained calm. The words contained no direct challenge to the marriage itself. Yet the idea quietly introduced the possibility that the emotional connection between husband and wife might not be as strong as it appeared in public. Once that thought entered the mind, it could continue growing without further encouragement. A powerful man might begin remembering moments when his wife seemed distant or distracted. Conversations that once appeared ordinary might now seem cold or uninterested. The contrast between those memories and the sympathy offered by his companion could slowly reshape how he interpreted the relationship. This process rarely involved argument. No confrontation occurred between husband and wife. No accusations demanded explanation. The change unfolded quietly within the private reflections of the man. Considering his own experiences, the strength of this influence rested in its subtlety. A direct attack on marriage might provoke resistance. The husband might defend the institution that supported his reputation and legitimacy. A gentle question, however, avoided triggering that defense. It allowed the husband to explore the possibility of emotional distance without feeling that he was betraying the structure of his marriage. Over time, repeated reflections could shift perception. The wife continued performing her duties as expected, maintaining the dignity of her household and the appearance of stability before the court. Yet within the husband's private thoughts, a quiet comparison might begin forming between the responsibilities represented by marriage and the comfort offered elsewhere. This contrast did not need to be stated openly. The difference could remain unspoken, understood only through the emotions attached to each relationship. Public life continued to present the marriage as strong and legitimate. Private thoughts gradually moved in more complicated directions. Observers within the court rarely witnessed these internal changes. They saw the same ceremonies, the same respectful interactions between husband and wife, and the same outward structure supporting noble marriage. The shift occurred silently within the reflections of one person whose thoughts shaped many decisions around him. A single question had introduced the possibility. The answer, however, continued unfolding quietly within the mind of the man who heard it. A noble marriage in Tudor society appeared secure through law, tradition, and the expectations of powerful families. Yet emotional distance sometimes allowed quiet reflections to grow when no one else could hear them. One gentle question, spoken without accusation or conflict, could begin a line of thought capable of unsettling even the most carefully arranged union. Life in the Tudor court depended heavily on words. Advisors debated policy, nobles negotiated alliances, and messengers carried information between powerful households. Conversation moved constantly through the palace, shaping decisions that influenced both the court and the wider kingdom. Yet, in a place so dependent on speech, silence could become equally powerful. Many people in the Tudor court expected immediate reactions during conversation. A statement usually receives agreement, disagreement, or explanation. When someone spoke, the natural rhythm of the discussion encouraged a response that clarified position or intention. Breaking that rhythm often created unease. A mistress who remained silent at a moment when others expected her to react could introduce uncertainty into the exchange. Silence did not provide confirmation or denial. It left the meaning of the moment unresolved, encouraging the person speaking to wonder what thoughts remained unspoken. This effect became especially noticeable when the silence followed criticism or emotional tension. If a powerful man expressed frustration or spoke harshly during a conversation, the expected response might involve defense, apology, or argument. Those reactions would continue the emotional energy of the moment, allowing the conversation to move forward in a familiar pattern. Silence interrupted that pattern, when the woman listening simply allowed the words to pass without reply. The absence of reaction altered the atmosphere. Instead of continuing the argument, the conversation slowed. The man who had spoken suddenly faced the space left by the lack of response. That space often encouraged reflection. Without an immediate reply to challenge or confirm his words, the speaker began reconsidering what he had said. Was his tone too harsh? Had he misunderstood the situation? The silence created room for these questions to appear naturally. In many cases, discomfort followed. Powerful men in the Tudor court were accustomed to controlling conversations. Advisors responded to their statements. Servants obeyed their instructions, and courtiers reacted carefully to maintain favor. When someone close to them refused to continue the expected pattern, the shift could feel unsettling. Silence removed the certainty of control. Instead of directing the conversation forward, the man now found himself wondering what the other person was thinking. The absence of visible emotion became difficult to interpret. Was she offended? Was she disappointed? Or was she quietly judging his behavior? These unanswered questions often drew his attention back toward her. A mistress who understood this dynamic did not need to confront the situation directly. Her silence alone created the possibility that something important remained unsaid. The mind of the person facing that silence often worked quickly to fill the gap. This reaction frequently encouraged the man to speak again. He might soften his earlier statement, clarify his meaning, or offer reassurance that he had not intended harm. The effort to restore balance within the conversation came from him, rather than from the person who had remained silent. The shift in control appeared subtle but significant. Instead of defending herself, the mistress allowed the emotional responsibility of the moment to move back toward the man who had spoken first. His desire to repair the atmosphere guided the conversation toward reconciliation without any confrontation. Over time, this pattern could strengthen emotional attachment. A powerful figure who repeatedly found himself returning to calm, a silent companion, might begin to associate her presence with deeper emotional reflection. The quiet restraint she displayed contrasted sharply with the louder conflicts he faced elsewhere in the court. Silence, therefore, carried meaning beyond the absence of speech. It signaled patience, self-control, and a refusal to engage in public conflict. These qualities often appeared dignified within the structured culture of the Tudor court. Observers might interpret such restraint as modesty or emotional discipline. At the same time, the silence created a subtle pressure. The man who had spoken harshly felt responsible for restoring harmony. His own need for reassurance and emotional balance encouraged him to return to the conversation with greater care. In this way, the absence of reaction became a form of influence. A mistress who avoided arguments did not appear threatening. She did not challenge authority or attract attention through dramatic confrontation. Yet, the quiet space created by her silence encouraged the man beside her to reconsider his behavior and seek reconciliation on his own initiative. The court surrounding them rarely noticed this exchange. From the outside, nothing remarkable seemed to happen. No raised voices echoed through the corridor. No public disagreement disturbed the calm order of the palace. Only a brief silence passed between the two people. Yet within that silence, the direction of the conversation, and sometimes the emotional balance of the relationship, quietly shifted. Silence in the Tudor court often appeared gentle and restrained beside the louder conflicts of politics and ambition. Yet the absence of reaction could create a space where powerful men reconsidered their own words and intentions. When that quiet pause unsettled the person who expected control, the conversation often returned to the one who had chosen not to speak. The Tudor court operated within a constant flow of observation. Every corridor, chamber, and hall contained people quietly studying one another. Courtiers watched the reactions of powerful men during council discussions. Servants noticed which visitors were welcomed warmly and which were received with caution. Even small gestures, an expression of fatigue, a change in tone during conversation, or a brief moment of impatience, could reveal shifts in mood that others quickly remembered. In such an environment, attention to detail became an important skill. A mistress who remained close to a powerful man gained access to moments that others rarely experienced. These moments were not always dramatic. Many consisted of ordinary conversations held after the business of the day had ended. A quiet evening beside a fire, a walk through palace gardens, or a brief exchange before a meal could provide opportunities to observe habits that escaped notice during crowded gatherings. Those habits often appeared small. A man might prefer silence during the early hours of the morning before council meetings began. He might grow impatient when discussions lasted too long without resolution. He might repeat certain phrases when speaking about trusted advisors and entirely different language when describing rivals. Remembering such details required patience. A mistress who listened carefully during conversation could store these observations quietly in her memory. When the same situation appeared again, she could respond in a way that reflected her awareness of his preferences. The gesture did not require elaborate effort. Simply acknowledging a familiar concern could suggest that she had been paying attention long before that moment. These small recognitions created a sense of familiarity. A powerful man who noticed that someone remembered his habits often interpreted that memory as genuine understanding. In the rigid atmosphere of the Tudor court, where many conversations revolved around political strategy or personal ambition, such understanding could feel unusual. Most people surrounding a ruler spoke to him with a purpose. Advisors offered plans intended to influence decisions. Ambassadors presented arguments designed to benefit their own kingdoms. Noble families discussed alliances that strengthened their position within the court. Each conversation carried an objective that reflected political interest rather than personal attention. Against this background, the presence of someone who seemed to remember the individual rather than the authority could feel different. If she recalled that he disliked a particular musician who often played during feasts, the memory suggested careful listening during earlier evenings. If she remembered a frustration he expressed weeks earlier about a difficult negotiation, the remark indicated that his thoughts had not disappeared into the noise of court life. These gestures quietly strengthened the impression that she understood him. Understanding, or at least the appearance of understanding, carried emotional importance for someone surrounded by constant expectation. A ruler spent much of his time defending decisions, responding to requests, and managing disputes that demanded careful judgment. Few people around him addressed the personal experience behind those responsibilities. A companion who appeared aware of that experience offered something rare. Sharing personal thoughts became easier within such conversations. A powerful man might describe the difficulty of balancing loyalty between competing noble families, or the frustration of hearing conflicting advice during council meetings. These reflections rarely appeared in official records, yet they formed an important part of daily life for those who governed. The woman listening during these moments gradually became associated with calm attention. Her responses did not need to be dramatic or persuasive. Often, they involved simple acknowledgements that confirmed she had heard and understood what was being said. Over time, the repetition of these interactions created a pattern of familiarity. This pattern encouraged trust. Trust often deepened further when small personal details were shared in return. A mistress might speak briefly about her own memories, worries, or experiences outside the palace. These disclosures were rarely elaborate. Yet they created the feeling that both individuals were participating in a private exchange rather than a formal interaction. The tone of the relationship slowly shifted. Instead of speaking only as a ruler, addressing someone of a lower rank, the man began speaking as an individual, describing his thoughts to someone who seemed receptive. The presence of shared moments allowed conversation to move beyond the rigid expectations that governed most court interactions. Within this atmosphere, the idea of companionship strengthened. A mistress who remembered habits, acknowledged frustrations, and shared quiet reflections appeared less like an observer and more like someone standing beside him emotionally. The difference between political loyalty and personal understanding became increasingly visible. In a court filled with rivalry and ambition, that distinction mattered greatly. Advisors competed for influence, ambassadors negotiated carefully for advantage, and noble families guarded their positions with determination. Many relationships surrounding the throne carried hidden calculations. A companion who seemed free from those calculations, therefore, appeared unusually trustworthy. The image of being the one who understands him best did not emerge suddenly. It formed slowly through repeated moments of attentive listening and remembered details. Each conversation strengthened the impression that she possessed a deeper awareness of his thoughts than anyone else around him. Observers within the palace rarely witnessed the process directly. They noticed only that certain individuals spent time together and that the ruler sometimes appeared more relaxed in her presence. The deeper sense of understanding remained invisible to those watching from a distance. Yet that invisible connection could grow quietly stronger with each remembered habit and each shared reflection. Careful attention to small habits and personal thoughts often appeared simple within the crowded life of the Tudor court. Yet remembering those details and responding with quiet sympathy gradually created the impression of a rare kind of understanding. A powerful man who began to believe someone understood him better than anyone else could slowly allow that belief to reshape the balance of the relationship. The Tudor court moved according to strict rhythms. Mornings were filled with council meetings and petitions. Afternoons often belonged to audiences, ceremonies, and the endless circulation of nobles through palace corridors. Evenings carried banquets, music, or quiet private discussions behind closed doors. Within this constant movement, access to powerful men became one of the most valuable forms of influence. Not everyone could approach them freely. Kings and high nobles lived surrounded by layers of people who managed their time. Secretaries arranged documents. Guards controlled entrances. And servants announced visitors. Every meeting followed a schedule shaped by rank, urgency, and political importance. Because of this structure, time itself became a kind of currency. Those who could spend time near a powerful man gained opportunities to shape conversation, offer ideas, or influence mood. The presence of certain individuals during quiet moments could affect decisions more than long formal debates in council chambers. A mistress understood this reality very clearly. Her influence rarely came from official authority. She did not hold an office, command armies, or sign royal decrees. Instead, her position existed in the informal spaces of daily life, where conversation flowed more freely, yet those spaces remained limited. For that reason, controlling when and how she appeared within those moments could become a subtle strategy. Rather than being constantly present, she might allow distance to grow between encounters. This distance changed perception. A person who appears at every gathering quickly becomes part of the background. Familiarity can dull curiosity, and constant presence often reduces the sense of anticipation that surrounds a meeting. Scarcity creates a different reaction. If a mistress did not always appear when expected, her absence could become noticeable. A powerful man, accustomed to seeing her during certain moments, might suddenly find those moments empty. The absence quietly altered the emotional landscape. Without explanation or conflict, a small space opened where her presence once existed. That space often encouraged reflection. He might wonder where she had gone, whether she was occupied elsewhere, or whether something had changed in their relationship. These thoughts often increased attention. Instead of taking her presence for granted, he began noticing when she returned. A brief conversation that might once have seemed ordinary now carried greater significance simply because it followed a period of absence. The rhythm of contact, therefore, shifted rather than a constant stream of interaction. The relationship moved in cycles of closeness and distance. Each return after absence restored the sense of novelty that might otherwise have faded. This pattern did not require dramatic gestures. The mistress did not need to declare that she wished to withdraw or create tension through visible disagreement. A simple decision to remain elsewhere for a time, attending different gatherings, speaking with other courtiers, or occupying herself with separate activities, could produce the same effect. From the outside, nothing unusual appeared to happen. Observers within the court saw only that she was not always present beside the man whose attention she often received. No open conflict suggested that distance had been created deliberately. Yet the emotional effect remained powerful. Human attention often grows stronger toward what feels uncertain or unavailable. The mind begins to value the return of something that is no longer constant. For a powerful man, surrounded by predictable routines, this subtle unpredictability could feel refreshing. Every day in the Tudor court followed similar patterns of duty and expectation. Political conversations repeated familiar arguments. Ceremonies repeated familiar rituals. And alliances repeated familiar negotiations. A person who appeared and disappeared within that routine introduced variation. The return of her presence might coincide with moments when he felt tired of court obligations or frustrated with political pressure. In such moments, the reappearance of someone associated with calm conversation and attentive listening carried particular emotional weight. Over time, this rhythm strengthened the sense that her presence mattered, not because she demanded attention or insisted on being heard, but because her absence quietly reminded him of what the interaction provided. The contrast between presence and distance made the relationship feel more significant. This strategy also avoided open competition. A mistress who fought directly for constant attention risked appearing demanding or disruptive. Such behavior could attract criticism from courtiers who already viewed her position with suspicion. Distance protected her image. By allowing space, rather than demanding closeness, she appeared patient and self-controlled. The relationship seemed to develop naturally, rather than through pressure. Within the careful etiquette of the Tudor court, such restraint carried its own form of influence. Those watching the relationship might interpret the distance as modesty or dignity rather than strategy. Meanwhile, the emotional effect continued to deepen quietly. Her presence became something noticed precisely because it was not constant. A powerful man who experienced that rhythm might gradually associate her with moments of relief from the relentless structure of court life. The scarcity of those moments made them feel more valuable. The influence did not come from command. It came from the quiet understanding that sometimes absence could speak more clearly than constant presence. Limited access to powerful figures defined the rhythm of life within the Tudor court. A companion who allowed distance to appear between encounters quietly transformed ordinary meetings into moments of renewed attention. That simple shift in rhythm sometimes revealed how absence could deepen attachment more effectively than constant closeness. Power in the Tudor court was closely tied to visibility. Nobles appeared in carefully arranged clothing during ceremonies, hoping to be noticed by those who controlled favor and reward. Courtiers timed their walks through corridors so that they might cross paths with powerful figures. Servants announced visitors with practiced voices, ensuring that each arrival carried a sense of importance. Being present, therefore, carried meaning. Those who remained frequently near the king or a powerful noble signaled loyalty, ambition, and usefulness. Constant visibility created the impression that someone belonged within the inner rhythm of court life. Many individuals believed that if they remained close enough to speak regularly, their position would remain secure. Yet familiarity could quietly weaken that influence. Faces seen every day gradually blended into the constant movement of palace life. Conversations repeated similar topics, and the novelty of certain encounters slowly faded. A person who was always available risked becoming part of the background rather than a presence that commanded attention. Against this pattern, absence created contrast. Someone who did not appear every day often attracted greater notice when she returned. The absence itself interrupted the routine that normally defined life inside the palace walls. This interruption rarely required explanation. A mistress might simply choose to spend time in different parts of the court. She might attend gatherings hosted by other nobles, remain within quieter chambers of the palace, or involve herself in social circles that did not revolve around the man whose attention she once held regularly. From the outside, these movements appeared ordinary. The Tudor court was full of shifting alliances and changing social groups. People moved constantly between chambers, gardens, and halls as they followed opportunities for conversation or patronage. One absence within that movement did not automatically attract suspicion, yet the person accustomed to seeing her presence noticed the difference. A powerful man who had grown used to quiet conversations during certain moments might suddenly encounter those moments alone. The familiar voice that once filled the space beside him no longer appeared. That silence could create curiosity. Without confrontation or accusation, the change encouraged questions. He might wonder whether she had chosen a different company, whether she had become occupied elsewhere, or whether some unspoken dissatisfaction had emerged. These thoughts often returned repeatedly. Each time he entered a familiar setting and did not see her, the absence quietly reinforced itself. What had once been ordinary interaction gradually became something remembered rather than experienced. Human attention often grows stronger toward what becomes uncertain. Something predictable rarely demands reflection. Yet once a pattern disappears, the mind begins to search for its meaning. The absence becomes more noticeable precisely because it interrupts expectation. For someone living within the strict routines of the Tudor court, such an interruption carried emotional weight. Daily life at court followed carefully structured rhythms. Councils met at set hours. Nobles gathered during ceremonial events. Meals and audiences followed established protocols that rarely changed. Within that predictable structure, personal companionship offered moments of relief. A quiet conversation, away from political tension, allowed powerful men to step briefly outside the relentless calculations of governance. When that familiar companionship disappeared, the contrast became sharper. The mind began to recognize the difference between ordinary court interaction and the calmer exchanges that had once occurred. The return of the absent companion, therefore, gained new importance. A meeting that might once have seemed routine now felt distinctive, simply because it followed a period of distance. Her presence reappeared not as background familiarity, but as something restored. This transformation required no dramatic gesture. The mistress did not need to compete openly for attention or confront those who surrounded the ruler. Instead, she allowed absence to reveal the emotional value of her company. Observers within the court rarely understood this change. From their perspective, the relationship seemed unchanged. The two individuals continued to speak when they met, and no public conflict suggested that distance had ever existed. Yet beneath that calm appearance, the rhythm had shifted. A powerful man who noticed the disappearance of familiar companionship might begin to value those interactions more deeply once they returned. The memory of absence made each conversation feel more meaningful. This quiet shift altered the balance of attention. Instead of assuming that her presence would always be available, he began to experience each encounter as something less certain. That uncertainty encouraged appreciation rather than indifference. Absence, therefore, communicated something words often could not. Without argument, accusation, or explanation, it revealed the importance of moments that once seemed ordinary. The space created by distance allowed the mind to recognize the value of what had disappeared. Within the crowded and competitive world of the Tudor court, such recognition carried quiet power. Moments of absence inside the Tudor court could appear insignificant beside the louder struggles for influence surrounding the throne. Yet the quiet disappearance of a familiar companion often created a space that drew attention more strongly than a constant presence. Such a space sometimes revealed how influence could grow, not from appearing everywhere, but from knowing precisely when to step away. Comparison existed everywhere within the Tudor court. Noble families measured their status against one another through titles, lands, and alliances. Courtiers observed which advisors stood closer to the throne and which waited at the edges of the council chamber. Even clothing, gestures, and seating positions revealed subtle hierarchies that everyone quietly understood. Relationships followed the same pattern. Marriage among the Tudor elite rarely functioned purely as a personal bond between two individuals. Instead, it served as a structure that connected powerful families, protected property, and reinforced political alliances. The wife within such a marriage represented stability and legitimacy, standing at the center of a carefully constructed system. Her position carried authority. She managed the household, supervised servants, and represented the dignity of her husband's family in public settings. At ceremonies, feasts, and official gatherings, she appeared beside him as a visible symbol of lawful union and social order. Yet, authority did not always produce intimacy. The expectations placed upon noble marriages often limited emotional openness. Formal etiquette governed many interactions between husband and wife, especially when servants or other courtiers were present. Public dignity mattered more than personal expression. Within that structured environment, the presence of a mistress introduced a different tone. The mistress did not carry the responsibilities of managing estates or representing family alliances. Her interactions, therefore, existed outside many of the formal expectations that shaped marriage. Conversations could feel more relaxed simply because they were not tied to duty. This difference often appeared subtle. A mistress rarely needed to criticize the wife directly to highlight the contrast. Direct accusations would have created conflict and attracted attention, something that could threaten her position within the court. Instead, the comparison emerged quietly. During conversation, She might speak about how pleasant it felt to spend time without ceremony or expectation. She might express appreciation for simple moments of conversation that required no witnesses or obligations. Such remarks did not mention the wife, yet they reminded the listener that life inside marriage often involved precisely those responsibilities. The contrast formed naturally in the mind of the man hearing these reflections. Human perception tends to organize experience through comparison. When two different forms of interaction appear side by side, the mind instinctively evaluates them. One environment might feel structured and demanding, while the other feels relaxed and attentive. The mistress did not need to declare which one he should prefer. Her role remained that of a quiet companion rather than a critic. She listened, responded calmly, and occasionally emphasized the ease of their interactions. These small gestures encouraged reflection. A powerful man accustomed to formal exchanges within his marriage might begin to notice the contrast between obligation and comfort. The difference did not necessarily diminish respect for his wife, but it could shift where he felt most emotionally understood. The process unfolded gradually. Each conversation that felt relaxed beside the mistress strengthened the sense that their interactions belonged to a different category from the formal responsibilities of marriage. The distinction remained subtle enough that it rarely attracted open discussion. Others within the court often sensed the change without hearing the conversations that created it. Courtiers observed that certain individuals spent time together and that the ruler or noble in question appeared more at ease, in particular company. Yet the deeper emotional comparisons remained invisible. Because no accusation had been spoken, the situation remained difficult to challenge. The wife could not easily confront words that had never been said. The mistress had not criticized her directly, nor had she attempted to undermine the marriage publicly. Instead, the difference lived within private impressions. A conversation free from ceremony here, a moment of attentive listening there, a shared reflection without obligation. These experiences accumulated quietly in memory. Over time, the emotional scale within the man's mind shifted. Marriage continued to represent authority, lineage, and social order. Yet the companionship offered elsewhere might appear lighter, more personal, and less burdened by expectation. Such comparisons rarely required explicit acknowledgement. The mind simply placed experiences side by side and concluded on its own. In the carefully balanced world of the Tudor court, this silent process could shape emotional loyalties without ever becoming visible as conflict. Subtle comparisons often passed unnoticed within the ordered life of the Tudor court. Quiet moments of relaxed companionship gradually stood beside the formal structure of marriage in a man's memory. From that silent contrast, new questions about where understanding truly lived could slowly begin to form. Political decisions in the Tudor court were rarely formed in a single dramatic moment. From the outside, official decrees appeared clear and decisive once they were announced. Royal letters were sealed, alliances were confirmed, and appointments were declared before witnesses. Yet the thinking that led to those decisions often developed slowly. Powerful men rarely relied on one conversation alone when considering political choices. Advice arrived from many directions. Councillors presented arguments inside formal meetings. Ambassadors promoted the interests of foreign rulers, and noble families pressed their own ambitions through carefully worded requests. These voices created a constant current of persuasion. Each advisor hoped to shape the direction of policy by influencing how the ruler interpreted events. Some relied on facts and reports, others on warnings about threats or promises of loyalty. The atmosphere surrounding political discussion, therefore, became crowded with competing interpretations. Amid this noise, quieter conversations sometimes carried unexpected weight. A mistress rarely appeared during formal council meetings. She did not stand beside advisors presenting official plans. Her influence instead existed in moments when the political pressure of the day had temporarily eased. These moments often occurred in private, after long hours of negotiation or debate. A powerful man might speak about the frustrations he had experienced earlier in the day. He might mention a counselor whose advice seemed unreliable, or a noble family whose loyalty felt uncertain. Such remarks did not always seek solutions. Sometimes they represented simple reflections spoken aloud after a difficult discussion. Yet the person listening during these moments had the opportunity to shape how those reflections continued. A mistress did not need to offer direct political instruction. Instead, she could respond with gentle observations that influenced the emotional tone of the conversation. A single question about whether a certain advisor truly understood his interests might encourage reconsideration. A small remark about someone's ambition could alter perception. These responses often appeared harmless because they did not resemble formal political advice. They emerged naturally within personal conversation rather than strategic debate. Yet, emotions frequently guide judgment. When a powerful man felt respected, understood, and supported during these private exchanges, the perspective offered within them could remain in his mind long after the conversation ended. This influence often shaped how he viewed other people within the court. If someone had been described during conversation as impatient, ambitious, or unreliable, the ruler might begin noticing those qualities more readily in future interactions. Small details that once seemed insignificant could now appear meaningful. Perception slowly shifted. The emotional tone attached to certain individuals began to influence how their words were interpreted. Advice from one counselor might now seem cautious and reasonable, while advice from another might appear self-serving. Over time, these perceptions affected wider political choices. Selecting allies and advisors depended heavily on trust. A ruler surrounded himself with those he believed shared his interests and dismissed those who appeared unreliable. Private impressions, therefore, mattered greatly. A single conversation did not determine political alliances, but repeated reflections could gradually shape judgment. The emotional confidence developed in private companionship sometimes influenced how persuasive different advisors appeared during official debate. This process remained invisible to most observers. Courtiers attending council meetings heard only the final arguments presented before decisions were made. They rarely knew the quiet reflections that had formed the ruler's opinions beforehand. The mistress did not need to appear within those public discussions. Her influence had already occurred earlier, during moments when the political tension of the day had softened into personal reflection. A few carefully placed remarks could remain in memory long after the conversation ended. The court surrounding the throne might assume that decisions emerged purely from strategy. In reality, human judgment rarely separates emotion from reasoning. Feelings of trust, comfort, and familiarity often guide which voices appear most convincing. The person who shaped those feelings indirectly shaped perception. A mistress who listened patiently and responded thoughtfully during private conversations could therefore influence how a ruler evaluated the people around him. She did not command decisions, yet her presence helped guide the emotional context in which those decisions formed. Within the intricate politics of the Tudor court, such influence carried quiet significance. Political choices in the Tudor court often appeared to emerge from formal councils and official debates, yet many judgments had already begun forming earlier, during private conversations where emotion shaped perception. In those quiet moments of reflection, a ruler's view of allies and rivals could slowly begin to change. Information moved through the Tudor court in ways that were not always visible. Official messages passed through sealed letters, royal proclamations, and council reports. These documents carried authority and were treated with care, for they represented the formal voice of government. Yet the court produced another kind of information that never appeared on parchment. Every corridor, chamber, and servant passage carried fragments of conversation. Courtiers spoke quietly while walking between audiences. Messengers repeated instructions to one another. Servants discussed the behavior of nobles whose moods had changed suddenly during the day. These fragments formed an invisible current of knowledge. Those who understood how to listen could learn much about the shifting atmosphere within the palace. A change in tone during a dinner conversation might suggest tension between two noble families. A rumour whispered among servants might reveal that a counsellor had lost the ruler's confidence. Such details rarely appeared in official records, yet they often signalled changes before they became public. A mistress who wished to understand the environment surrounding her position, therefore, paid attention to those small pieces of information. She rarely gathered them alone. Within the Tudor household structure, maids and attendants moved through spaces that powerful figures rarely entered. They carried clothing between chambers, arranged beds, delivered messages, and waited quietly while nobles spoke nearby. Their presence was often overlooked, because servants appeared ordinary within the daily routine of the palace. Few courtiers worried about their conversations being overheard. Words spoken in frustration or confidence sometimes travelled far beyond the room in which they had been uttered. Maids, therefore, became quiet observers. A servant helping to dress a noblewoman might hear complaints about a political decision. Another carrying trays into a chamber might notice which advisors had arrived for a private meeting. Even the timing of visits between courtiers could suggest changing alliances. These observations formed small pieces of a larger picture. A mistress who maintained friendly relationships with her attendants could hear these details during casual conversation. The information rarely arrived as dramatic revelations. Instead, it appeared as scattered remarks that slowly built an understanding of the court's mood. Patterns began to emerge. If several servants mentioned that a particular advisor had been visiting the palace more frequently, it might suggest that his influence was growing. If whispers circulated about tension between noble families, it could indicate that alliances were shifting. Such knowledge allowed preparation. A mistress who understood these patterns could adjust her behavior before changes became visible to everyone else. She might avoid associating too closely with individuals whose influence appeared uncertain, or she might strengthen connections with those who seemed to be rising. This awareness offered protection. Positions within the Tudor court were rarely secure. Favour could rise or fall quickly depending on political circumstances, personal rivalries, or unexpected events. Remaining informed, therefore, reduced the risk of being caught unprepared. Information also shaped the conversation. If the mistress knew that a certain counsellor had recently angered the ruler, she might speak carefully when his name appeared in discussion. If she had heard that tensions were growing between two factions, she might have avoided remarks that placed her on the wrong side of the dispute. Such caution preserved stability. The information gathered through quiet networks rarely led to dramatic confrontation. Instead, it guided small decisions that prevented mistakes. Knowing when to remain silent, when to appear supportive, and when to distance herself from certain individuals became easier with better awareness. These adjustments often remained invisible to others. Courtiers observing her behaviour might simply assume that she possessed good instincts about the shifting politics of the palace. Few would realise that those instincts were supported by a steady flow of small observations carried through servant networks. The maids themselves rarely viewed their role as political. They shared what they heard simply because conversation filled the long hours of service. Complaints about difficult masters, curiosity about noble quarrels, and casual gossip about visitors all moved naturally through their discussions. Yet those ordinary exchanges held value. For someone paying attention, the scattered pieces of gossip formed early signals of change. A whisper overheard in a corridor today might become tomorrow's political crisis. Understanding those signals allowed quiet preparation. A mistress informed by her network of attendants could anticipate tension before it erupted publicly. She might adjust her presence at certain gatherings, avoid involvement in fragile disputes, or strengthen connections that promise stability. In a court defined by uncertainty, such preparation carried quiet importance. Information in the Tudor court often appeared to travel through official letters and formal council discussions. Yet another current of knowledge moved quietly through servant corridors and whispered conversations. Those small fragments of gossip sometimes revealed changes in the court long before anyone else recognized the approaching storm. Authority in the Tudor court appeared clearly defined. The king sat upon the throne, surrounded by symbols of sovereignty that reminded everyone present where power formerly resided. Royal seals confirmed decrees, banners displayed family lineage, and the arrangement of seats within council chambers reflected the hierarchy of the realm. These visible signs created the impression that power belonged only to those who possessed official rank. Nobles carried titles that defined their status. Councillors held offices that granted them the right to advise the crown. Generals commanded armies, while judges pronounced decisions in the name of royal authority. From this perspective, influence seemed to flow downward from the throne. Orders travelled from ruler to advisor, from advisor to messenger, and from messenger to the wider kingdom. Each step followed the formal structure that defined Tudor governance. Yet human decisions rarely emerged from structure alone. Behind the ceremonies and titles stood individuals whose judgments shaped how authority was exercised. The king might hold the final voice in political matters, but the thoughts that guided that voice formed gradually through conversations, impressions, and private reflection. Within that space of reflection, another form of influence existed. A mistress possessed none of the symbols associated with authority. She did not wear a crown, sign decrees, or sit among councillors during official debates. Her presence rarely appeared in written records that described political decisions. Nevertheless, she existed near the person whose decisions defined the court. The importance of that proximity often went unnoticed by those who focused only on visible rank. While councillors debated policies in formal settings, the ruler still carried his thoughts into quieter moments where reflection replaced argument. During these moments, conversation could take a different shape. The pressure of the council debate no longer demanded immediate conclusions. Instead, the ruler might describe his frustrations with advisors whose motives seemed unclear, or discuss the uncertainty surrounding alliances between powerful families. Such reflections often searched for emotional reassurance rather than strategic instruction. A companion who listened carefully during these exchanges could influence how those concerns developed. She did not need to propose specific policies or instruct the ruler on matters of governance. Her influence existed at an earlier stage. By responding thoughtfully to his concerns, she could help shape how he interpreted the people and situations surrounding him. A remark suggesting that a particular advisor appeared impatient might encourage him to notice that impatience more clearly in future meetings. Perception gradually shifted. Once a certain impression formed in the ruler's mind, later events often reinforced it. Words spoken during council debates might be interpreted differently, depending on the emotional context already attached to the speaker. This process happened quietly. No official announcement revealed that the ruler's perception had changed. Councillors speaking before him might assume they were being judged solely on the strength of their arguments. Yet the emotional framework through which those arguments were heard had already begun forming elsewhere. A mistress who understood this dynamic did not appear as a political rival to the advisors surrounding the throne. She did not challenge them openly or compete for authority in visible ways. Instead, she influenced the environment in which judgment developed. Her role involved listening, reflecting, and occasionally offering observations that shaped how the ruler felt about the people around him. These small shifts in perception could later influence decisions that appeared entirely political on the surface. Observers within the court often misunderstood the nature of such influence. They assumed that power belonged only to those who spoke loudly during council meetings or commanded armies in the field. The quiet conversations that occurred outside those settings rarely entered the historical record. Yet decisions rarely begin at the moment they are announced. They begin earlier, within the private thoughts that guide judgment. The person who influences those thoughts participates in shaping the outcome long before the formal decision appears. In this way, influence existed beyond titles and ceremonies. A mistress might never appear within official documents describing political events. Yet her presence could shape how the ruler interpreted the world around him. That interpretation, in turn, guided the choices that defined the court. The throne symbolized authority, but the mind behind it remained open to persuasion. Power in the Tudor court appeared to belong to those who wore crowns and carried official seals. Yet the thoughts guiding those symbols often formed in quiet conversations far from council chambers. Quiet influence over those thoughts could sometimes shape the direction of power more effectively than authority itself. Influence inside the Tudor court often appeared mysterious to those observing it from a distance. Some individuals seemed to gain the attention of powerful men without holding official positions, while others with noble titles struggled to maintain their standing. From the outside, such influence could look almost effortless, yet beneath that appearance lay uncertainty. Unlike formal authority, psychological influence carried no guarantees. Titles could be written into law, estates could be protected through inheritance, and offices could be confirmed through royal decree. These structures created stability that allowed noble families to preserve power across generations. The influence held by a mistress existed outside those protections. It did not rest on written contracts or official recognition. Instead, it depended heavily on the emotional connection between two individuals. As long as that connection remained strong, her presence could shape conversations and influence perception, but emotional connections rarely remained constant. A powerful man in the Tudor court lived within a world of constant pressure. Political conflicts, diplomatic negotiations, and personal rivalries surrounded him every day. His attention shifted continually as new challenges emerged. This shifting attention created vulnerability. The psychological influence enjoyed by a mistress often depended on the ruler's current feelings. If he felt comforted by her presence, her influence might grow stronger. If his emotional focus moved elsewhere, that influence could fade with surprising speed. Unlike political advisors, she possessed no formal role that required him to consult her. Counselors held positions that obligated the ruler to hear their advice during official deliberations. Generals and administrators carried responsibilities that made their presence necessary within the machinery of governance. A mistress held none of these protections. Her influence existed only as long as the ruler chose to value her company. If his preferences changed, no system within the court guaranteed her continued access. Such a change could happen quickly. The Tudor court contained many individuals competing for attention and favour. New companions might appear, alliances might shift, or personal interests might change unexpectedly. What once seemed like a stable relationship could weaken without warning. When that change occurred, the consequences could be severe. A mistress who lost favour did not simply lose emotional closeness. She often lost access to the social and political environment that had sustained her position. Without the ruler's protection, she could find herself isolated from the networks that once surrounded her. This isolation carried practical risks: housing, financial support, and social acceptance often depended on the favour of powerful men. If that favour disappeared, a former companion might struggle to maintain the lifestyle she had once known. Legal protection offered little assistance. Marriage created rights, recognized by law and custom. A wife possessed certain claims to property, household authority, and family identity. These rights did not depend entirely on affection. They existed as part of the social structure that supported noble lineage. A mistress possessed none of these guarantees. Her position remained unofficial, existing outside the legal framework that protected legitimate family relationships. If a ruler decided to end the relationship, she had no formal claim to compensation or continued status. This reality forced many mistresses to remain cautious. They understood that emotional influence could open doors but could not secure them permanently. Maintaining favour required constant awareness of changing moods and circumstances within the court. Such awareness often shaped their behaviour. A mistress might avoid actions that could provoke jealousy or suspicion among powerful families. She might carefully maintain alliances with servants and courtiers who could offer support if circumstances shifted. Even with such precautions, uncertainty remained unavoidable. The structure of the Tudor court favoured those whose authority could be confirmed through titles and bloodlines. Emotional influence operated within a far more fragile environment. The very quality that made psychological influence effective also made it unstable, because it depended on personal feeling rather than formal obligation. It could vanish the moment those feelings changed. What once appeared to be quiet power could suddenly reveal itself as a temporary advantage. Those who relied on such influence, therefore, lived with constant awareness of its limits. They might shape conversations, influence perception, and even affect decisions for a time. Yet the foundation of that influence remained emotional rather than institutional. Within the unpredictable world of the Tudor court, such foundations could shift quickly. Psychological influence in the Tudor court could appear powerful while it lasted. Yet that influence rested on emotion rather than law or title, leaving it vulnerable to sudden change. Once favour faded, the quiet power that had shaped conversations could disappear just as silently as it had emerged. The history of the Tudor court often appears orderly when written on parchment. Names of kings, en noble, and advisors fill the official records preserved in archives and chronicles. Royal decrees carry seals that confirm authority, while diplomatic letters describe alliances and conflicts between powerful families and foreign kingdoms. These documents create the impression that history was shaped only by those whose names were recorded. Within the formal language of official texts, influence seems to belong to those who held titles and offices. Councillors appear beside the throne as architects of policy. Generals enter the record through accounts of military victories. Noble families emerge through marriages that connected dynasties across Europe. Yet the reality of daily life inside the Tudor court was far more complex. Behind every official decision stood countless private conversations that left no written trace. Words spoken in quiet chambers rarely appeared in state papers. Personal reflections shared during evenings away from council meetings vanished once the moment passed. These forgotten exchanges formed another layer of influence. A mistress often existed entirely within that invisible layer. Her presence rarely appeared in legal documents or diplomatic correspondence. She did not sign decrees, command armies, or represent the kingdom in negotiations with foreign ambassadors. Despite this absence from official records, she could remain close to the ruler during moments when decisions were still forming. Such proximity allowed her to hear frustrations that never appeared in council debates. She might listen as the ruler questioned the loyalty of certain advisors, or wondered whether a particular alliance would strengthen or weaken his authority. These conversations did not resemble formal political discussion. They unfolded quietly during moments when the pressure of governance had softened into reflection. The ruler might speak not as a monarch addressing his council, but as a man thinking aloud about difficult choices. Within those moments, influence could appear in small ways. A thoughtful remark, a question about someone's motives, or a simple expression of agreement could shape how those reflections developed. The mistress did not need to provide direct political instruction. Instead, her presence affected the emotional atmosphere in which decisions were considered. Once those decisions entered official debate, the earlier conversations disappeared. Councillors might argue about strategy and policy, believing that the discussion unfolding before them represented the full process of decision-making. Few would know that certain impressions had already begun forming elsewhere. This gap between private influence and public record created an unusual historical silence. When historians later examined the documents of the Tudor court, they encountered only the visible structure of power. Names recorded within council minutes appeared to represent the full cast of political actors. The quieter influences remained hidden. A mistress might have shaped the ruler's perception of a trusted advisor or encouraged suspicion toward a rival faction. Yet none of these contributions appeared in official archives. Without written evidence, such influence faded from the narrative of history. This absence did not mean the influence never existed. It simply reflected the way historical memory tends to favor formal authority over personal interaction. The events preserved in records often emphasize titles, treaties, and public acts rather than the emotional experiences that guided them. For that reason, Many individuals who stood close to power vanished from the story that followed. The mistress might appear briefly in rumours or letters written by observers who noticed her presence at court. Yet even these references rarely described the full extent of her influence. They hinted at proximity but could not capture the countless private conversations that shaped perception. As time passed, the traces of those conversations disappeared entirely. The official documents remained, describing decisions as if they had emerged solely from council deliberations. The emotional context that had helped shape those decisions faded into silence. This process created what might be called an invisible legacy. The effects of quiet relationships could echo through political outcomes long after the individuals involved had disappeared. Alliances might have formed or dissolved partly because of impressions developed during private exchanges that no chronicler recorded. Yet history remembered only the outcome, not the unseen influence behind it. Within the Tudor court, such hidden influence formed a quiet shadow beneath the visible structure of power. It moved through conversations that were never written down, and through relationships that existed beyond the boundaries of official authority. Over time, the people who participated in those moments slipped quietly out of the historical record. Their presence shaped decisions that would later define the kingdom. Yet their names rarely appeared beside the consequences of those decisions. Official records of the Tudor court preserved the voices of kings, councillors, and noble families who shaped public policy. Yet many influences that guided those decisions existed only in private conversations that left no written trace. In that silence of the archives, the quiet presence of forgotten companions still lingers behind the history we think we know. Softness often appeared harmless in the world of the Tudor court. Within a palace filled with armoured guards, ambitious nobles, and loud political debates, gentle behaviour rarely attracted suspicion. Those who spoke quietly, listened patiently, and avoided open confrontation seemed distant from the struggles for influence unfolding around the throne. Yet, appearances inside the court often concealed deeper forces. Power rarely existed only in visible forms such as crowns, titles, or official commands. The court functioned through relationships as much as through law. Conversations shaped perception, and perception guided decisions that could alter the future of noble families and even kingdoms. Within this delicate environment, influence sometimes emerged from places that formal authority overlooked. The mistress stood outside the structure of legal power. She possessed no crown, no office, and no recognized place within the hierarchy that defined Tudor governance. From a distance, her presence might appear fragile, temporary, or unimportant. Yet her closeness to the ruler placed her near the center of his private world. During the quiet hours when the noise of the court faded, conversations could unfold without ceremony. The ruler spoke not as a symbol of authority, but as a man reflecting on the pressures surrounding him. Political struggles, uncertain loyalties, and personal frustrations often surfaced in these moments. A companion who listened carefully during such reflections gained access to something powerful. She heard thoughts before they were shaped into official decisions. She witnessed doubts that never appeared in council chambers. She understood the emotional weight carried by a man expected to govern a restless court. This understanding created a subtle influence. The mistress did not need to challenge advisors openly or compete with nobles for authority. Instead, she shaped the emotional environment in which the ruler interpreted the world around him. A thoughtful remark, a gentle question, or even silent attention could influence how he viewed the people surrounding him. Such influence rarely appeared dramatic. It unfolded slowly through repeated conversations, small observations, and the quiet development of trust. Over time, the ruler might begin to associate certain feelings of comfort and clarity with the presence of the person who listened without judgment. That emotional connection could affect perception. The ruler might become more receptive to certain ideas, or more cautious toward particular individuals, depending on the impressions formed during private exchanges. These impressions, though subtle, sometimes guided choices that later appeared in official records. Observers within the court rarely recognized this process. They saw the outcomes of political decisions, but seldom understood the quieter experiences that had shaped those outcomes. The visible structure of power overshadowed the invisible conversations that influenced it. This contrast created one of the most intriguing paradoxes of court life. A society that valued strength, authority, and visible hierarchy also allowed subtle emotional influence to operate quietly beneath its surface. The court believed it functioned through clear rules and established order. Yet human relationships continued to shape its direction. The mistress represented that hidden dimension of power. Her position existed beyond formal recognition. Yet her presence could influence the thoughts of the most powerful man in the kingdom. She did not command armies or sign treaties, but she stood beside the person who decided when armies marched and treaties were signed. In this way, softness became something more complex than weakness. Gentle behavior allowed influence to move quietly through spaces where confrontation would have failed. A calm voice, patient listening, and thoughtful remarks could travel further than a loud argument within the intimate world of personal reflection. The Tudor court, therefore, revealed an important truth about power. Authority might appear strongest when expressed through command. Yet influence often worked more effectively when it remained unseen. Decisions that shaped the future of the kingdom sometimes began not in council chambers, but in the private moments where thoughts were still forming. History rarely records those moments. The chronicles remember kings, battles, and treaties. They preserve the names of nobles who stood before the throne and advisors who spoke during council debates. These figures appear clearly in the story of Tudor England. The quieter companions remain largely invisible. Their influence existed within conversations that left no written trace. The gentle presence that helped shape perception disappeared once the decision was entered official record. Yet the effect of that presence remained. Many choices that altered alliances, strengthened rivalries, or changed the direction of policy may have been influenced by impressions formed during those quiet exchanges. The ruler's mind, shaped by countless personal interactions, carried those impressions into the public decisions that history later recorded. In that sense, the story of Tudor mistresses reflects something larger than individual relationships. It reveals how human emotion continues to shape political life, even within systems built on authority and law. The structures of power may appear rigid, yet they remain guided by the thoughts and feelings of the individuals who occupy them. And those thoughts are rarely formed in isolation. They emerge through conversation, trust, curiosity, and the quiet presence of those who listen when others speak loudly. The mistress, standing outside the formal structure of authority, often occupied precisely that space. Her influence existed not in commands, but in perception, not in titles, but in attention. The softness she displayed allowed her to move through the emotional landscape of the court without attracting the resistance that open power often provoked. This quiet influence rarely left visible marks in historical documents, yet it formed part of the hidden current that shaped how rulers understood the people and decisions surrounding them. Seen from this perspective, the Tudor court becomes more than a stage of political rivalry. It becomes a place where visible authority and invisible influence existed side by side, each shaping the other in ways that history only partially remembers. Softness in the Tudor court did not always mean weakness. Quiet influence often travelled further than open authority in a world ruled by hierarchy and ambition. Sometimes the course of history shifted, not through loud commands, but through the quiet presence of someone who understood how to guide a powerful mind. Thank you for spending this time exploring a quieter side of Tudor history. The stories of kings and battles often fill the pages of history books, but the softer forces that shape those events deserve attention as well. Moments of conversation, trust, and subtle influence remind us that human relationships have always played a role in the decisions that define an age. As the lights of the Tudor court fade in our imagination, the corridors grow quiet once more. The debates have ended for the night. The courtiers have returned to their chambers, and the palace settles into the calm stillness that follows a long day of intrigue and conversation. Now it is time to let the mind rest. Allow the echoes of these quiet stories to fade gently into the background, just as the whispers of the Tudor court faded into the long passage of history. There is no need to hold on to every detail. Simply let the atmosphere of the past drift softly through your thoughts. Thank you for listening, and wherever you are, I wish you a peaceful evening, a calm mind, and a very good night.